Well, hello, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to another dynamic and exciting episode of Impacting Life 24/7. Can you believe that we are back doing what we do best, and that is illuminating those who are impacting lives 24/7? You know, it was a great 30 days off, ladies and gentlemen, or maybe 31 days. I can't remember, but I took some time off to reflect, to replenish, to restore, to rejuvenate, all those R words, all those power words. And, you know, I really missed having an opportunity to spend time with you all, but I also enjoyed the opportunity to travel across the globe. I mean, I went to Germany, Australia, Houston, everywhere. The seas and shining seas is where I went, and I didn't have to leave my house. How awesome and cool was that? And so here we are back at Impacting Life 24/7. And I want to thank all of you for your support who have been supporting our movement now. We have really created a movement that, we want to show people that when you want to, you can do anything you put your mind to. And I have someone that's joining with me tonight who, just so coincidentally, about 24 hours ago, I was in Australia with her in her studio, in her virtual studio. The lady that I'm talking about tonight, her name is Vera Lee, and she has a program and a podcast called Why Me? And here's what Vera says. Have you ever had one of those gut-wrenching moments where life ground you to your knees and you asked, why me? I know there's some of you out there in my audience that are saying, why me? We all go through some of the adversity at times, at different times in our lives. And her podcast is all about discovering your stories and journeys from asking yourself, why me? And declaring, this is why me. This is why I am who I am. Vera Lee, the host, she speaks with people all across the globe, and they shared with her about how to move from their why me movement into recognizing the opportunities associated with that and turning adversity into a unique advantage. See, sometimes people stop at adversity, but I brought someone on this show. I'm very blessed. She's highly in demand. She's ranked at the top 30 of podcasts on iTunes. So it's not just like we're bringing somebody on the show that has absolutely nothing to do, ladies and gentlemen. She's extremely busy. And so I had to really twist her arm to get her to jump time zones and go back in time to come on my show. Because right now it's nighttime, but there it's morning. How cool is that? She says, as a creative artist and coach herself, her guests, they discuss the interconnection of emotions and transformation in those moments and how their actions then seize the opportunities of discovering their unfiltered and authentic voice and ultimately their life's purpose. You know, it's going to be hard not to get all choked up in this show because I consider this lady my friend, my sister, and we are tight now. And so I am bringing to our virtual studios the one, the only Miss Vera Lee from Australia. Welcome, Vera.
Wow, thank you so much. That was adorable. That was gorgeous. That was beautiful. And I really do value your words. Thank you so much.
Well, listen, Vera, like I said before we got started, that this was going to be a family reunion of sorts. And instead of it taking 3 years to get a family reunion together, we just decided to take a day and a half to get back together. And
We
how
did.
cool is that? And so, Vera, one of the things I like to do right off the bat, and I'm probably not going to change this forever. I want people to be able to connect with my audience, with my guest immediately. So I give out your information a lot throughout the show. So before anybody gets to hear your fantastic story and before they get to hear how phenomenally you're changing an entire region, tell people right now how they can get up with Vera Lee.
At Vera Lee Original on social media, Insta, Facebook, LinkedIn. They're my preferred platforms. And it's Vera Lee, as in VERALEE, original.
Doesn't she have the coolest accent, ladies and gentlemen? I really need to work on my accent because it's not every day you have someone from Australia on your show, and these Southern North Carolina folks sound crazy compared to the cool folks in where are you calling? She's her land or her nativity, Australia, is really a pot potpourri of languages that she has, and so I'm really, really, really cool. I mean, I'm like I'm captivated. I'm listening to her. I'm sitting there listening, like, okay, I'm going to try to see if I can sound like her on the show. So anyway, Vera Lee, listen, I again want people to understand, number one, that your time is valuable. And I really thank you so much for taking time out. If you could, because we understand that you're a podcast host, you're a content creator, you're a mover and shaker over there in Australia and around the world, give us, without letting everything out, but give us some insight as to who Vera Lee is. Tell us how give us a little background about yourself.
Who Vera Lee is? What a great question. Vera Lee is a mother, a single mother. Vera Lee is an artist who learned to embrace her creativity through trauma. Vera is a very determined, systematic, logical thinker who balances the logic with the creativity through my heart. And I have a great big heart and I love on people. And that, in a snapshot, is who I am.
Yes, and Vera, that I can attest to that. I can tell because this is our third time talking, and I can tell that your heart truly does come through what you're doing. You can tell people who are just in it for something to do or busy work, but you're different. And one of the things that you highlight on your show is helping people find their voice, their why me. So, because I want people to go to Why Me on iTunes. All they got to do is go Why Me with Vera Lee, right? And they can find it on
That's right.
iTunes. Yeah. And so, Vera Lee, why don't you help us unpack the whole Why Me movement and why it is that you created this platform called Why Me?
Yeah, because I believe that everybody has had a challenge. Everybody has gone through adversity in their life, no matter how small or how massive the impact of that adversity was. Most of us have asked that question, why me? Why is this happening to me? I personally had asked that question so many times through many different circumstances and experiences that I'd gone through in my life. I was born with disabilities. Some of those were not actually diagnosed properly until in my mid 30s.
Mm.
And on top of the disabilities, I had certain chronic illnesses. I was a very determined person. And so I learned very early on in my life not to be limiting what I could do because of those physical disabilities. And as a junior, I grew up playing tennis. My family was a huge tennis family. We had a whole family business based around being the tennis professionals and providing services to people at grassroots, which was something that nobody had ever done in Australia before. I'm very proud of my dad for everything that he built and the way that he raised me with my mum in having the approach of loving on people no matter what their status, no matter what their skill level. And that is why I interview people on my show. And this is why I started the Why Me movement, not to be looking only at people with status or without status, but to be including everybody because we are all human beings. We all go through difficult things in our lives. And so the Why Me movement itself was conceived the second time that I lost my voice.
Mm.
The first time I lost my voice, it was a metaphorical loss. I was brutally raped and went through a very traumatic experience with my then husband.
Oh my.
And I'm talking about domestic violence. I'm talking about continued sexual assault, often more than once a day. Through that experience, when I left him with a very young son, he was about 5 or 6 months old at that time, I didn't know how to use my voice to say to people what had happened. I didn't know how to communicate that information.
Wow.
And so I went to a support group around other women who'd also been in a domestic violence relationship. And so often, I don't know the percentages, but so often people are also sexual assaulted in those relationships. And that's because of the control factor and the dynamics of what domestic violence is all about.
Right.
And
Let me just interject
mm,
there because that's something that's its own that's really its own show right there. And
Yeah.
you and I have talked about the various traumas that we have both gone through. But I know that there will be
Mm.
somebody listening in our vast audience of Impacting Life 24/7 that just heard what you said and see the smile and the brightness that you have and how you have overcome. But what people don't understand is the adversity that you went through. And so
Yeah.
you were married, and this person decided that you were not valuable and decided to, engage in sexual assault to his own wife.
Yeah. Yeah. Basically, it was an ownership thing. And so the abuse started in very subtle ways.
Hmm.
And unfortunately for me, I was very naive. This was my first real relationship with somebody.
Hmm.
I'd had a few minor boyfriends in the past, but this was my first true relationship. This was the first person I had sex with. And so when you are married to somebody and you believe that this is for life, you believe this is about love, and then that dynamic changes to control and that you become an object for their disposal, for their use and disposal, that is something that can very easily break your heart. And it did break my heart in a way. However, even through the most difficult moments, and I don't know if you want me to get into those in detail or not. However, let's just say that the first time that I felt like I was split in two, it wasn't just physically, it was myself. I separated myself from who I was. And
Hmm.
at that point in time, I felt like I didn't know who I was anymore, that I was this object, this thing to be used and abused. And I didn't like that. I also didn't know how to deal with the shock of that. I didn't know who to turn to help. I didn't feel that I could find my voice. And I spent 3 days after that incident curled up in bed, crying uncontrollably, unable to do anything else.
Ladies and gentlemen, you're listening to. Thank you for tuning in to Impact Life 24/7, and I have with me as my guest the founder and creator of Why Me and the host of the Why Me podcast, the lovely Miss Vera Lee from Australia. And what she's doing is she's unearthing, I know, a very emotional story of the tragedy and the struggle that she went through. Being in a marriage, you would assume that that is supposed to be a safe place, and to have someone violate you that's supposed to have given vows of protection. uh was there a particular point in all of this where did you blame yourself? Did you think you were at fault? How did you reconcile that? What were the thoughts that was going through your mind while this was going on?
Well, those 3 days, I can tell you, I asked, why me? Why is this happening to me? Almost on repeat, like a broken record. Although I didn't take blame for that particular incident, what I did take blame and feel guilty about was that I got myself so involved with this person without understanding who he was at his core.
Mm-hmm.
And that's because these people, perpetrators, are so good at manipulating others. They're so good at choosing when they behave this way. And this is something that was a real light bulb moment for me afterwards when I'd left the relationship and I was in a healing room with other women. I was using my artwork to creatively express my trauma and to work through and start that healing recovery journey that I went on. I realized one day that he chose to treat me this way every single time that he committed an act of violence, sexual assault, which for me, I didn't even understand that sexual assault was violence. Like in my head, I just had never had come across that. I really didn't understand the whole, how do I put this in words? I didn't understand the connection because I was so disconnected from myself. I was so disconnected from what I thought a healthy, loving relationship was meant to be and what I was living in.
Right. Well, one of the things that I have picked out, and I think we picked this out the other night when I was on your show, is that you found some avenues to express and start to begin to have a voice again. Some of that is through photography, and some of it was through your artwork. I think you got something behind you. Was that something you created there? That artwork there?
Yes, this is a doorway. and it's almost like a prison doorway. And so I felt very imprisoned within that relationship. But I also knew that there was a door out of that house, there was a door out of that relationship. And eventually I took that door. I walked out, I closed the door behind me, and I realized that there were other doors going to open in my life, no matter how dire things felt at that point in time, no matter how unsafe I felt, no matter the fact that I had to spend 7 years changing homes every year on the run from this man, no matter that I had to spend 2 years going through the sexual assault system and giving my statements. No matter how difficult everything was, I had a six month old baby that was my first child. I was learning to be a mother. All
Mm.
of a sudden, I was a single mum. I'd never wanted to be a single mum in my life, and yet I knew our safety was more important than anything else. And so, in that support group, I was thankful enough to have a wonderful art therapist who led us through expressing our emotions and working through our trauma through artwork. And I had always been creative. However, like my voice, I'd felt my creativity had been squashed by that relationship in particular.
Mm.
And so being able to have that space to start exploring, to start choosing colors and say, well, why am I scribbling black on a page right now? What am I feeling? And getting that association, and, why today do I pick blue and what does blue mean to me? And for me personally, it's very calming color, but there's a depth to blue. There's a possibility, like the ocean, that at any time the tide can change. At any time you can have the chaos of a tsunami occur. And yet the property of the water is still water. And it's like your own identity. I am still me. I have had this tsunami of events occur to me, this trauma that has overcome me, and I needed to find my way back to who I was and who I wanted to be. And through my artwork, I was able to do that. And that was when I couldn't physically find the words to speak what had happened. I used my artwork to do that.
Wow. And so I'd like you to bring up another photo if you could. And while you're doing that, I want everyone who's tuning into Impacting Life 24/7 with your host, CL King. We are blessed to have with us in our virtual studios the podcast extraordinaire and host of the Why Me podcast there in Australia, Miss Vera Lee. And Vera Lee and I have we have found ourselves to be our friendship and our I don't know, our paternal friendship has been expedited because of similar traumas that we've shared. Now, everybody's story is unique. And so, for those of you that may be just tuning in or may just catch it right now, Vera Lee is a podcast host, but she's also an overcomer of adversity and tragedy. And so she was just sharing with us how she had went through years of sexual assault by her own husband, and one of the roads and avenues by which she began to gain somewhat of a voice, and that was a multi-step process. I'm understanding, but she started expressing that through her artwork. So what does this piece represent?
So this is part of a five-piece series, and this is about the five stages of grief. For losing a relationship is like going through grief of losing a loved one.
Mm.
And for me, this was my first significant relationship and all the trauma associated with that. When I stepped out and I walked away from that and I had to learn who I was, I had to go through that grieving process. And so this is stage one, called denial. And you'll see that the image of the person is facing away from us. They don't want to know about what's going on. And so often in trauma, that's our first reaction. I can't deal with this. This is overwhelming. I don't want to know about this.
Wow.
The next stage, which is this one here, is the anger stage.
Mm.
And so once we accept this has happened to me, then we get really, really angry.
Mhm.
And that anger in this situation is warranted. We need to feel some of that anger. What's important is how we apply the use of that anger. And for me, I poured that anger into my artwork. I poured that anger into expressing how I felt for others to feel connected to my story, to feel connected to their own story, and to help them progress through the stages of grief as well.
I think you just said something that's very, very powerful because my son is going through something like this. I just talked to him today about the stages of grief. His friend A very good friend from high school, I mean, middle school on up to high school, just committed suicide just a few short
Oh,
days ago. And I told him that you're going to obviously experience, multiple stages of grief. And you talked about
mm,
anger. And here's what I guess we would like to say to our audience. Maybe you can correct me if I'm wrong, but anger, you don't want your anger to become self-destructive or destructive, period.
yeah.
It is a true emotion. The Lord said, "In your anger, don't sin." So it is a true emotion. Otherwise, we wouldn't have been given it. So you found a way to channel that anger and even express it, but not to a detriment to yourself, huh?
Correct. So what I did was I used photography and I would take an image and I would strip it right back down digitally to its light, shape, and form. And from that point, I would pour those emotions in layer upon layer upon layer to create these digital images. And so the one I had up earlier that was like a door with a prison way, that started out as a photograph. And in fact, every piece of my artwork starts out as one photograph. And as we layer in, that's like the healing journey that we go through grief, through trauma. We're layering back in all the stuff that we want to keep about ourselves, all of that confidence, all of that hope, all of that ability, all of that embracing who we truly are and who we want to be. And I felt very blessed that going through this process allowed me to realize that I was who I wanted to be.
Mm.
And that was a really powerful time.
So you got another stage. What's this one?
So this is the third stage, which is bargaining. And this is the point where we've gotten through the anger. And I do need to say here that we do move throughout these stages. We move back and forth. It's not like we start
Sure.
at one and we end up at five.
Right. Right. That's right. That's right.
Yeah. So the bargaining stage is an interesting one because we're bargaining with ourselves, we're bargaining with culture, we're bargaining with the people around us. We're trying to work out where we fit in within all of this. And we're trying to work out, how do I get through this trauma, and knowing that I need to deal with that pain that's going to come up as I'm going through this process.
Mm.
And for me, again, this is where going through the artwork helped me, because it was a process. There was a system involved. I'd created this system for creating these works, and that allowed me to navigate. I'm feeling really, really bad tonight. What am I going to do about it? I'm going to lift myself up by allowing myself to feel that pain. I'm going to honor it. And then I'm going to create something absolutely beautiful
Wow.
out of something really ugly. And so that was what helped me to use that energy.
That's powerful.
Mm. It was powerful. It was a very powerful process. And some of these pieces of artwork, not the ones you're seeing now, but some of these pieces would take me 80 hours to go through this process per
Wow.
piece of artwork. So
Wow.
it was a labor of love that again reflected what I was going through in my life, in actually putting the importance of myself up there, not to a point where I was egocentric, not to a point where I didn't care about others. It was the opposite. I knew and understood that if I could look after myself and get myself to where I needed to be, then
Right.
I would find my voice again and I would be able to speak words and life into people all across the
Wow.
globe. And so my artwork was one portal from where I do that. So this is the fourth stage. This is the depression stage.
Mm.
And so once we start going through this process, once we open that door to the trauma, sometimes we can feel like it will never end. And this is often where people feel very depressed, because they're like, what's the point of doing this hard work? Where is it going to get me except for more pain?
Right.
There is a light at the end of the tunnel. There is hope. And you know this yourself. And we spoke a lot about this in my podcast yesterday. There is a level of pain that you need to address to stop it manifesting and growing inside you and becoming, to that, fueling that anger that we then feel like we can't control. And so it's very important to honor those emotions and try and look for ways that work for us. This approach won't work for everyone. It worked for me
Right.
in that I was able to embrace that creativity that I had essentially had suffocated from my life. And so for me, it was a very freeing experience. At the same time, learning how to trust the process and not the end result was a huge part of this process for me, in that I stopped worrying about what my artwork was going to look like. And I started just allowing the process to unfold,
Nice.
allowing the artwork to make itself known, and to be that life of its own and transformational. And through that, my artworks I started loving. Whereas previous to that, I'd never liked really anything that I'd created. So it was a really symbolic way of getting through the trauma and discovering who I was.
Well, I can see that, even though it's going to cost a little bit to get it shipped over here, I can see several of these pieces will be hanging up in my studio here at Impacting Life 24/7. So, folks that are tuning in now, I'm joined by Miss Vera Lee, the host of the Why Me podcast. And Vera, do you have a website too?
I'm actually getting one made. So it's probably a couple of weeks away, maybe three,
Okay.
four
So
weeks.
people can
Yeah,
still reach out to you via social media like
absolutely. Yeah,
Instagram.
Vera Lee original. Yeah, Vera Lee original. Instagram, LinkedIn, Facebook. They're my three main ones.
Yeah, and you know what? If 3 billion people are on those platforms, so if you can't find Vera Lee, then you ain't looking hard enough. And so, yeah,
Yeah.
again, ladies and gentlemen, I just want it to be clear to you that the reason why we have this show is for people to have another platform to be able to come on and illuminate the work, the impact that they're making in their world. Now, sometimes people just they're entrepreneurs and they want to start a business or they want to create a process or whatever, but it's another type of person that I bring on the show who has gone through tragedy or gone through adversity and has taken that adversity and given voice to it. And so Vera Lee is walking us through how she walked through giving voice back to herself after experiencing years of sexual assault and physical abuse from her husband. And so this is stage number 4. What was stage number 5?
So this is stage number 5, and
Oh,
this
I'm
is
sorry. Yeah.
acceptance. That's
Yeah.
okay.
Yeah. Mhm.
Yeah, so this is acceptance. And this is why the person now is open to what is coming at them in life. And this is a really vital stage in going through grief. When you get to the point that you can accept that these things have happened, you can accept the path that you've traveled and accept that these experiences, if you embrace them and look for the opportunity within those experiences to learn to grow personally, and as I do, and so many people like yourself do, to then extend that out to our community to help by sharing our stories, give other people permission to also share their own stories. And so, acceptance was probably the stage that I spent the least amount of time in while I was healing, and
Mm.
yet it was so crucial to be able to heal. So I jumped in and out of it. And then eventually I've stayed in that acceptance state. And for me, accepting who I was, accepting my part in what happened, I still chose to marry this man.
Right.
I still chose this man for my husband. I still chose to love this man. And I also chose to forgive this man, but not forget what he did. And I think that's a really important distinction to make. And I must say that it was my pastor at my church that helped me to make that choice myself. I said to him one day, I don't understand why so many of these things, so many years later, still affect me so deeply. And he said, because you need to forgive. And I said, well, I've tried to forgive and I don't know how. And he said, I think what you're hanging on to is the fact that you have used these experiences to help yourself and other people. And so you believe that to forgive is to forget. And I said, you're right. I'd
Mm.
never looked at it that way. And so the moment I realized that I could forgive him, he's a human being. Yes, I hated the choices he made. And I don't use that word hate very often, but
Mm.
I hated the choices he made. I hated what he did to me.
Right.
And yet I could forgive him. And the day that I truly forgave him, allowed myself to be free.
Wow. Forgiveness is a very liberating element. It's as much a benefit to the forgiver as it is for the forgivee. And
Oh, yeah.
I've had to do that same thing relative to the trauma that I went through. Forgiving was hard, and I think sometimes I have to go back and check, make sure that my forgiveness is still in place.
Yeah,
Because
yeah.
bitterness can rise up, but like you said, I like what you said in terms of moving in and out of these stages. And oftentimes, it's not just like it's not like just a successive 1 2 3 4 5 and you're done. You
Mm,
you can find yourself revisiting these areas, and that's okay. I think
yes.
where I see people get hung up is that they don't progress past the grieving, or they don't progress past the anger, and they don't understand how to utilize that. So when somebody is, because you've really laid this out beautifully for us. I mean, is there really a silver bullet timeline for each phase?
Mm, loaded question, that one is.
Yeah, yeah, right. Because again, some people think like, okay, and I've had to be mindful of that. Like
Yeah.
when my wife lost her mother, she grieved for quite some time, and because she was
Mm,
helping take care of her in her later stages, and I had to understand that everybody's processing of grief and all that is different. And so,
mm.
do you find that to be the case?
Oh yeah. Look, I was given an approximate timeline because funnily enough, I asked that question, and I think everybody who goes through trauma recovery asks that question. How
Mhm.
long am I going to be like this? How long am I going to spend trying to work through this mess that
Mm,
has been my life? And I don't want this mess to extend out to the rest of my life that I can't enjoy living. And
right.
so being able to move through those stages, I was given a timeline of 7 years. I was told that that is about the average, and that yes, it does vary with everybody, but the majority of people fall into about a 7 year cycle where, in about 7 years' time, their body, their mind, their heart has had enough time to really come to terms with what happened, to really embrace the impact that it's had on them, and to work out ways through that recovery to then really be embracing life and moving forward. And again, moving forward without forgetting, because for me, I find it so important to still acknowledge what happened. And so many people often talk about reinventing themselves.
Mhm.
Personally, I don't like that. I don't feel that I reinvented myself. I feel that I reacquainted to who I was at my core. And as a child of God, I reacquainted with God through this process as well. And for me, those two key points were pivotal in where I'm at now and how I can help other people.
That is absolutely phenomenal. And what is going on behind you there? Did we look at that one already? Was that one at the beginning? This is this
Yeah.
this has some movement to it. I feel some motion. Explain this one.
Yeah, so this one's very much like the cells within our body, and our cells move around through our bloodstream. And for me, I was diagnosed with a condition in my mid 30s called eosinophilia. My eosinophilia was the precursor to my severe asthma, which we'd always known I had severe asthma right from a kid. But it was also the precursor to something called vocal cord dysfunction. And I had one of the worst cases of this particular condition. And what it meant was that my asthma meant that my lungs were extremely inflamed and had trouble breathing air out. My vocal cord dysfunction, my actual airway would collapse when I breathed in. And so instead of having an airway that's about that big, mine was like that. You could barely even see any space between the airway. And so I was suffocating almost every day. And this was, and just to link back to your previous question about the timeline, I was given this timeline of 7 years, and I sort of hung on to that for a while. And I got to my 7 years, and I knew there was a lot more that I hadn't yet done. And I knew that my journey was going to take a lot more than 7 years. And in actual fact, it took about 17 years for me. And part of that reason was because I immersed myself so much into all of the adversities I've gone through in my life. That period with my husband was only one.
Right.
I'd grown up being bullied. I'd grown up with disabilities that limited how much I could perform in my chosen sport, that limited how much I was able to do, that limited what I could eat, for example, because of my predisposition to becoming obese. When my body started breaking down, then the medications that I was put on meant that I ended up at 196.4 kilograms, which is huge for somebody of my height, which is 5'6", I think, in the old
Yeah.
way, 169 centimeters, because we're over metric
We
over
can't
here.
we can't convert it over here that fast.
No, no, that's it. But yeah, so that was just huge. And at that point in time, I was so ill from everything that happened and from all the medications that had been thrown at me to help try and heal me. And it was a wild ride, I'll say that. and literally step by step, breath by breath. And I was at a point where I didn't take breathing for granted. And again, I was asking that question, why me? I'm a good person. Why is it that I don't even breathe like everybody else? I have to focus on every in breath and then every out breath. It was a two-part process for me. And I would walk around on oxygen. If I was lucky to be walking around, usually I was sitting down somewhere, often in a wheelchair, if I couldn't walk. And I would be looking at people and I'd be saying, do you know how lucky you are that you can breathe without thinking about it? Because these are the things we take for granted. And
Right.
because I had that denied for so long in my life, to me, I was very aware of that. And yet other people weren't. And for me, that was a valuable lesson of life itself and adversity. So often people are going through adversity and we don't know. So I'm looking at these people saying, you're so lucky that you can breathe without thinking. But there might be a whole lot of other stuff that they're dealing with that they could be looking at me and saying, you're so lucky you're not having to deal with this stuff that I'm going through.
Right.
And so as human beings, we have that connection. We can connect through so many different mediums. And for me, the visual art was one of them. And so
Well,
this piece,
go ahead.
sorry.
Go ahead.
Oh, I was just going to say this piece is indicative of the eosinophilia. And for me, this condition, it ended up leading me down a path of a new treatment. After my diagnosis, I was told, this is what you have. This is one part of the puzzle that we didn't know before. So we are going to look to try and help you more. However, there was no treatment at that point in time. And so I was part of a clinical trials unit. And one of their experimental treatments was to inject Botox into one of my vocal cords to paralyze that vocal cord.
Oh
Now,
my.
what that did was it kept my airway open and it kept me alive because there was only so much that everything else I've been doing, including prayer, was doing. And so for me, again, I'm a believer that God had a plan. And some of us need to go through these experiences to become the person we're meant to be
Right.
and to step into that potential. And so within 24 hours of having that life-saving treatment, I felt my body shutting down. I was dying and I was in a coma.
Oh
And it
Lord.
was a coma I wasn't meant to survive.
This is after you got the treatment to keep your vocal cords open.
Correct. Within 24 hours,
Well, what
that
precipitated
treatment.
the coma?
So because this injection went directly into my vocal cord had a bit of a reaction, and that set off a reaction with my asthma, and the two did not work very well, and basically everything swelled up and I couldn't get air in and out of my body. And so for somebody my size, for somebody with my conditions, putting me in a coma was their absolute last resort to save my life, because you don't put someone in a coma in that state usually, because we're extremely hard to intubate when we are an asthmatic. And on top of that, a vocal cord dysfunction. And on top of that, somebody of my size. And it was a moment. It was many moments. And on my show trailer, I recount people through part of that moment leading up to that coma. And one thing I will say is that I was doing everything I could to internally connect to myself, to connect to God, and to ask God, can you help me get through this?
Mm.
And I had a vision in that operating room right before I was put under that coma. And it was my grandfather, who I'd never met in real life because he'd passed away 2 years before my parents got married. And so that was before I was born.
Mm-hmm.
And he appeared in the room and he simply said to me, Vera, you're going to be okay. I mean, how many words is that? Vera, you are going to be okay. 7 words that
Mm.
changed my life, because at that moment, I said, God, I trust you.
Right.
You have me, you have my soul. You look after me while they do whatever they need to do. And so I wasn't there during those 3 days of that coma. God was taking care of me. And when I came back, nothing had changed in the world, but my perspective of everything had changed. I
Right.
tell people the blue of the sky had never looked so deep. The green of the grass had never been so vibrant, and the warmth of that sun on my skin
Yeah.
never been so comforting. And so my perspective on life had changed, and that that was where the Why Me movement was born.
Perspective. See, and I was hoping that that's where it's logical that you would take us to this point, because when you come back, you got to think you got an opportunity that many, let's say, many people don't get. You got an opportunity to, for all intents and purposes, be away from your conscious self,
Yes.
and for 3 days, and then when you were brought back, you got to see things in a totally different perspective. Now, the journey on the second half of what you've experienced, and ladies and gentlemen who are tuning in to our show, Impacting Life 24/7, I have Miss Vera Lee. She must be related to me because my name is Christopher Lee. Not very
Yeah.
many people know my actual first name. It's like, "Oh, so CL, your actual name?" I'm like, "It's my stage name, man. Leave me alone." But Miss Vera Lee, the host of Why Me, the international podcast, and where she takes people and walks them through how to express their channels by which they've overcome adversity. And we're listening to a very, very heartfelt, very transparent story with Miss Vera Lee of we've went through one stage of adversity with which dealt with having someone that you love, physically and sexually assault you, your own husband. And then we
Mm.
have the physical component where Vera Lee's vocal cords were constricted because of a number of things, one being severe asthma. And so, I've pried around a little bit, Vera Lee. I was, scoping out all the stuff you got going on, and I came across a video that you recorded of your breathing troubles.
Ah,
And
yes.
that that audio really, really impacted me. So it was breathing for you was a whole lot more than just, something we take for granted, huh?
Absolutely. And I'm going to tell you something that will blow your mind right now.
Go ahead.
That breathing, that was recorded in September last year, not when I'm at my worst. Because when I'm at my worst, you can't hear me breathe because I'm barely breathing. So
Oh,
this is something that I still go through now.
oh, wow.
Mm.
Man, that's something. And so, I mean, will you see a continued progression of improvement, or what?
Absolutely. I am so much better than I used to be. And every single day, I feel a little bit better than the day before. And I do have days where I go backwards. I do have days where I struggle with my breathing more than others. And yet I can see from that helicopter perspective. And again, life for me is all about taking the different perspective, looking at things from a different angle.
Yeah.
And I can see even on the days that I struggle, I'm still so much better than I was back then.
So give us some insight. And I know you don't want to let all the cats out the bag, but give us some insight about your WTF movement. Tell us about that.
Mm.
I love that. And give the folks some insight on what she created, this thing called WTF, but it's not what you think. Tell us, Vera.
It's what the flab, as in flabby bits. When you are overweight, you have these flabby bits. And what the flab is my new podcast. I know it's so funny. And it's meant to be funny because if we can't have humor about ourselves, then we're going to get stuck in the messiness of life. We
Right.
need to be able to laugh at ourselves and we need to be able to find ways forward. And so, What the Flab is my new podcast I'll be launching soon, which is all about weight loss with and without surgery. And so, because I did get to 196.4 kilos, I could barely walk 3 steps without collapsing because of the weight, because of my conditions. And so, I had to learn ways of getting myself back and conditioned to be able to live life and stay here. I was given this second chance, and yet I didn't know how I could physically get the most out of life in that state. And so, what the Flab is talking about my journey of how I lost 60 kilograms up until November this year, last year, sorry, November 2020. So, we're talking 3 months ago. And then I still made the choice to have weight loss surgery. And it's not for the reasons most people would think. For me, weight loss is not about what the scales say.
Mhm.
So, those medications that I was on that caused a lot of my massive weight gain, they also did a lot of damage to the hormones in my body. And there is only so much that I've been able to get to a point where, I mean, losing 60 kilos, man, that's a whole person.
Yeah, that's
It's a
right.
massive achievement. And yet I still have a lot more that I want to do to get my body back into balance. And so, with a whole team of people, we decided that I would still go ahead with the weight loss surgery. And yet it took 8 years for me to be well enough to actually undergo that surgery.
Wow.
And so that was November 4th, 2020. And I've had the vertical gastric sleeve, and my weight loss has slowed down. And I couldn't be happier, which most people who've gone through the surgery are like, what? Like, no, you do this surgery to lose your weight fast, right?
Right.
No, for me, it was about getting my body back in balance. And so the weight loss has been quite slow after the surgery. And I love that because my body is not being put in shock.
Right.
And I'm enjoying life. I'm enjoying the process, and I'm taking this time to reacquaint myself with healthy portions of food. I've always eaten healthy food, but it's the portion size that was the most difficult
I
for
saw a
me.
picture. I saw a picture of
Hmm.
you. You were talking about you were in some sort of space somewhere, and you said that you couldn't fit. It was like two walls or some scenario, and you couldn't fit through sideways to get through
Yeah.
there. And I think you showed there was an update to that, right?
Yeah. So
Yeah.
that is, it's interesting because my parents and I, we built side by side, and we have this shared fence. And between that shared fence there's a gate.
Hmm.
And when we first moved in together here in this space, there was a concrete hole, a hole put in the concrete to open that gate. And my dad put the hole and thought, yep, that's all great. And I couldn't fit in it. There was no way I could fit in it. And so he made this other hole. Now, this other hole is, I don't know, maybe 70 centimeters out. Like, it's a fair way out. And that was how far we had to go to open this gate. That photo was the first hole. So I couldn't fit through sideways. I couldn't squash myself through sideways, even trying to squash my belly in, which we call a pred belly, not a preg belly, because prednisolone, cortisone is what creates that hormonal change and that extra weight there in that area in particular. And so the photo that I put up there was me not even side on, but front on, like my hips front on fit through the smaller portion of that gate. And now there's even a gap. How crazy is
Yes.
that?
And so you when you talk about this in terms of all that you have been through. Now you went through 17. You said it's taken an evolution of about 17 years.
Mm,
But when you hear night in and night out with your show, you hear various stories and such. How does that make you feel, understanding that Vera Lee, who was silenced physically, silenced emotionally, silenced metaphorically, now is using her voice in all three of those dichotomies to
uh,
give voice to other people? How does that make you feel, Vera?
it makes me feel fantastic, and it makes me feel that I'm finally able to step into my purpose.
Right.
Something I haven't shared with you yet is when I woke up from that coma, because my vocal cord was paralyzed, I had no physical voice. And those treatments went for 2 years. I had no physical voice for 2 years. Now, when I was in my church and I had people, some who knew me, some who were visiting that church, prophesy over me that I would speak words and life into people across the globe. And not just through my artwork, they use the words speak
Mhm,
words.
mhm.
And I believed this was going to happen. I knew I had it in me to do this. And yet, at the time when I had those prophecies, I was receiving this information, and my logical brain was saying, yeah, but hang on a minute, you have no voice. And at that point, we didn't know if there was ever going to be any other treatment. And I was actually at one point researching tracheostomies, which I would have lost my voice forever.
Oh my.
And so we come to now, and I am not only allowing other people to have their voice, the voice that I nearly lost forever is impacting so many people, including my guests, because of my experiences, because of everything that I've gone through in life, and because of the way that I have embraced the adversity and learned how to really step into that unique story that is mine, and yet I share so many common elements with other people, as I do with yourself.
Yeah.
That is something that is almost unable to be put in words.
So, I know there's a book on the horizon for you.
Hmm.
I'm working on mine, at least in my mind.
Yep.
I've got like 3 books that I'm like, okay, I'm going to get them done. But listen, I want, ladies and gentlemen, that are tuning in to Impact Life 24/7. You're going to have to go back and watch this episode if you're just joining us now. But if you would do me a favor, I'm asking you to share this broadcast with everyone you know that needs to hear someone who's gone through extreme adversity and come out on the other side. I appreciate Vera's acknowledgement of her faith and trust in God, and she's also put her faith and confidence in the surgeon's hands. You can do both. This is what I tell people. Listen, if my arm is broke, y'all want y'all come pray for me. But then if my arm don't get healed, I need y'all to take me on down to the hospital real quick.
Yeah.
Okay. Because you know what I mean?
That's
I just
it.
we need to work in both elements.
Yeah.
And the joy and the absolute, the way you present what you're presenting is so powerful. Now, do you engage with any other, because I know you said you were doing a women's group or you were in a group, but do you do any work with other groups now, or
Mm.
outside of what you're doing?
Yeah, unfortunately, I haven't probably in the last maybe 10 years. So I was very much involved in being a speaker because when I did find my voice, I was on a lot of public stages speaking about my experience. It's only April 2020, however, that I've had a really public voice. So up until that point in time, I was very careful about where my story was being shared because I still had this man out there, and whoever may know him, I mean, it's that whole 6 degrees of separation. It was something that I was very guarded about. And in April this year, I decided I'd had enough. I decided that no longer was the fear that I was putting on myself
Right.
about this man and the consequences of sharing my story going to stop me from doing this. And I understood that this was the right time for me. And for me, COVID, I know, has been extremely difficult for many, many people for many, many reasons.
Mhm.
I was put on forced lockdown for 9 months because of my medical condition risk category. And so all of a sudden, I was unable to leave the home, and neither was my son. And I decided to use those extra 3 to 4 hours every day to really think about what I could do to reignite the Why Me movement. I was finally in a place where I'd had paid work for quite some time, so I was financially stable. I had gotten to a point in my healing journey physically where I was able to speak again. I was doing really well. And so I wanted to then capitalize on saying, you know what? COVID's going to be really difficult if I don't stay connected to people.
Mm.
What better time than to launch this movement? What better time than to start the podcast and connect people from all over the world through sharing our deepest, darkest moments of adversity and the lessons about how we all overcame those experiences, how we share those lessons with others so that they too can have the permission to go on their own healing journey and to share their valuable stories.
Wow. Well, I just want you to know, ladies and gentlemen, that it is. I'm glad that I'm coming back into our next season of Impacting Life 24/7, because this helps me remember the why. Now, I'm not, why me is copywritten, so I'm not going to take the why me, but I am going to understand the why. And if you, like she said, for so long she was even a little hesitant about going public with her voice, until she's like, what, I guess the next equation, or the next element of the statement is, when you ask why me, I would say to Vera Lee, why not Vera Lee? And so, because had you not decided to give a national voice to what you're doing, I would have never met you. Then if I would have never met you, then my audience would have never met you. And there's somebody I know, because we have such a broad listenership. There's somebody I know out there tonight that can identify with what you're saying on multiple fronts, whether it be a weight loss journey, whether it be a physical abuse, whether it be physical constrictions. And you've taken all of those, which in singularity would cause some to just quit.
Mm,
You had those three compounded working against you,
mm.
and you still said, I guess, God, why me? Are you going to use me? Mary, I'm sure Mary, the mother of Jesus, said the same thing. Why me? And here we are in 2021. Can you believe that it's 2021? I want you to tell folks how busy you have been, though, since the Why Me movement launched, because people think, podcasters just kind of sit around and drink coffee and use ring lights and stuff. Tell everybody how busy you've been, girl.
Oh, wow. Let's just say that I feel like I have a newborn child again, which you'll relate to with the new puppy,
Oh,
right?
Lord,
Uh,
yes.
I get about 5 hours sleep. When I started the podcast and I launched it, we pumped out 55 interviews within a 3-month period. And in between that, it was 5 months in total because I had a 2-month layoff with my operation and
Right,
recovering from that. Um, I still work full time. So I work
right,
my 8 to 5 day job. And I was doing all of this in my spare time. I do all the content creation. My son, thankfully, um, accepted my invitation to help me with the editing. But I still go back through and I still listen and I do all the personal introductions. And this is the thing, like, I think per podcast episode, when you look at the pre interviews, the connection that we make, the editing work, I mean, some of these episodes went for 3 hours.
right,
Now, so you got to at least triple that when you're editing.
right.
So we're talking 9 hours just for a 3 hour episode. And then you're talking about all the social content creation and, the booking calendars and checking in with people and all that sort of stuff. You're probably looking about 15 hours minimum per episode.
Right. And this is why I brought a team on with me after
Yeah.
after last season. I realized that I was like, if you ever remember Tom and Jerry, Tom would be spinning the plates and have like this plate and this plate and this plate and this plate.
Yep.
I said that, you know what, guys, I can only do so much because I'm a speaker and I felt like being a podcast host was kind of like being a DJ. You know what I mean? I got these headphones on, I got this microphone. Yes, to all the ladies out there. I'm just like, man, this
That's
is
it.
this is not me. But then I realized, oh no, this is very, very powerful, but
Yes.
it is a lot of work. And that's,
Yes.
Vera, we are beyond thankful for you and the work that you're doing there in Australia, because I think you said a certain percentage of your guests are not even in Australia, right?
Yeah. Like 80% of my audience is overseas.
Wow. See, so it truly is a global voice
Yeah.
that you have. And so, when physicality tried to keep your voice, and when an ex-husband tried to keep your voice, and when weight tried to keep your voice, your voice is being heard literally all across the world, Vera. So listen, if people want to get up with you, Vera, okay, now you got to tell it slow, because y'all Australians talk fast now. Okay, people want to find you. Tell them where they can find you and what to look for.
Yes, they can find me on Instagram, Facebook, and LinkedIn. Vera Lee Original. VERALEE Original.
Yes.
And they can also find me on Clubhouse as Why Me Girl.
Yeah, yeah. I have dipped my toe ever so slightly into Clubhouse, and I just got to I got to narrow down what I'm looking for. I tried to host a room one time, and nobody came, so I was just like, oh well, nobody's interested in nothing I got to say. But I know that it's a process, and working through it. I just, with so many different platforms, because we manage about 11 different platforms right now. It's just like, man, that's just one more thing you got to organize. But it is a great collaboration tool. So if you're looking for Vera Lee and you like to collab with her more, I want you to go to Clubhouse, and you can find her at Why Me Girl. Is that what it was called?
That's right. So
Oh,
my handle is Vera Lee Original, as it is for social media, but I show up as Why Me Girl.
yeah, the Why Me Girl. She's just making it happen. I Cannot tell you, folks, how absolutely amazed I am at the story that Vera Lee has shared with us. And what I'm going to do is because I'm doing this more and more throughout every show that we have, and I hear the music, so maybe that's our sponsors telling us that they're going to stop keeping the lights on if I don't if I don't end the show soon. And listen, before we get into what I want Vera to do, I want you guys to know that if you'd like to become a sponsor of Impacting Life 24/7, where you can have stories like these every Monday, Tuesday, and Thursday broadcast around the world and have us continue to be a platform and a voice for others. Vera is a voice for the voiceless. I feel like we are too. All you got to do is go to clkingspeaker.com and you can scroll down a little bit and there's an opportunity for you to subscribe. We've got 3 levels. We got a silver, we've got a gold, and we got a platinum. The silver level is $1 a month. I don't know what that equates to in Australian money, but it's still 4 quarters in America. So we got the silver level, gold, and platinum, and each one of those have various things that come along with them. If you'd like to be a sponsor, we'd love to have you. Now, Vera, the music's playing. So I want you to take this moment, take about 60 seconds, and I want you to speak to my audience directly. Those that felt like 2020 kicked them in the gut. And here they are in 2021, still uncertain about their voice. I want you to speak to them and encourage them with the words only Vera Lee can give. Go ahead, Vera.
Why me? Start asking yourself why it is you that has your unique experiences under your belt, that has your unique experiences to share with others, to inspire others, and in the process, be inspired yourself. Stop asking the question, why me? Start embracing who you are at your core and start embracing this. This is why me. I have all of this to offer the world, and the world is listening to you. Give yourself that permission. I love you.
Tremendous words from the internationally known sensation, Miss Vera Lee from the Why Me podcast. And it was an honor for me to be on her show. But what I'm going to do is, after we're done here in the virtual studios of Impact Life 24/7, I'm just going to go ahead and send her another link for her to schedule to come on back. We got to have her back, ladies and gentlemen. And maybe we can schedule it to where we might be in the same time zone. God only knows, because it's still tomorrow whenever it's my today. So Vera Lee, you can find her on all social media outlets, on LinkedIn, on Facebook, on Instagram, and got a website coming out soon. I know her book is going to be phenomenal. Go on to iTunes and find her at Why Me with Vera Lee, the Why Me Vera Lee podcast. And I want all of my listeners from coast to coast, I want you to take time and share this broadcast, because I want everybody to hear Vera Lee's story. And I want all y'all to connect with her because she's just a really cool lady. So listen, that does it for another episode of Impacting Life 24/7. A little different episode for me because I don't usually do them this way. But this has been so cool. This has been so wonderful. And Vera Lee, we thank you for spending time with us. Don't go anywhere after we're done here. We'll talk off air. But again, Vera Lee from the Why Me podcast. And Vera, we thank you so much for spending time with us.
I thank you. I feel so honored to have been invited onto your platform. I feel so grateful that our paths have crossed, and I feel very connected to you, and hopefully your audience will feel connected to both of us more after this as well.
All right. You can't help but appreciate that. So listen, ladies and gentlemen, again, Impacting Life 24/7. You want to be a subscriber? Go to clkingspeaker.com and become an IL247er. That's right. Impacting Life 247. All right. We'll talk to you again soon. Thank you, everybody.